Joyce, would you like to go? Jared, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say Joyce first.
Oh, hello.
Hey, Jared.
Hello. Hi. So loneliness is like being alone.
Anything else? So isolation by
Yeah.
itself is loneliness.
So if you're alone, you're isolated.
Okay. So that's an example of where you would say then loneliness is not necessarily a feeling. Loneliness can be an objective state of being. It's just the state of being alone, or
Yes.
being isolated.
Being
Okay.
alone.
Good, good, good. Thank you, thank you. All right. Who's next?
Nancy, would you like to go?
I'm going to pass.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Shelley, would you like to share?
Sure.
Thank you.
It's interesting because I've actually been single for many, many years, and I love my space and my choice to be in my space by myself. But it's just weird that, lately it's felt like a bubble.
Right,
And
right.
by myself in this bubble, even though I've always loved being in my space. It's
Well, and I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Shelley.
Shelley. Shelley, thank you. And this is flowing beautifully because I think you incorporate nicely the sort of tension between the previous two answers and that tension between loneliness being a subjective feeling or an objective state of being. Um, because on one hand, you sort of described solitude, which is not necessarily loneliness. It's a good thing. Um, but then also you mentioned being in a bubble, which is sort of saying like, okay, maybe we can be lonely, but we're not even consciously aware that we're lonely or that we're isolated because we have that bubble effect. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So thank you, thank you. It's a complicated, it can be a complicated question. Do we have anybody else, or is that everyone?
Actually, Jessica just shared something in the chat that I will share. Um, Jessica said, I would say that loneliness feels like not connecting with people, community, or energy. I can feel lonely with a group of people, and I can feel connected when I'm by myself. Beautifully said, Jessica.
Yeah, that is very beautifully said. I can feel lonely in a group of people or connected when I'm by myself. Yeah, yeah. Um, was that everyone? I don't want to leave anyone out.
Yes. Oh, Christina, would you like to share?
Sure. I guess I would say loneliness feels like maybe not being truly seen by other people or understood, or also sometimes not feeling like you have your people or my people,
Yeah.
that there aren't others of my tribe. And so feeling that disconnection from that.
Right, right. And so thank you, Christina, because you introduced another sort of variable, which is not just being around people, but the quality of the relationships or the quality of the people that you're around. I was reading an example not long ago about let's say you have someone who's just, alone with their pets or alone with a couple of people, versus, around a crowd of folks at work, right? And so, you have the person who's around and interacts a lot with people at work all day, but feels lonelier, even though they're around more people, just because the nature of the quality of the relationships is just transactional, surface level, not very meaningful. So that person ends up feeling lonelier than, the other example, just because of, the nature of the relationship, the quality of it is not that deep. And yeah, yeah. So not to ramble, but thank you for introducing that variable. The quality of the interactions matter when it comes to feeling lonely as well.
That was
So I think that's
everyone, Lamar.
okay. Great, great, great. Thank you, thank you. Just wanted to start with that one to get everybody's voice heard and just get your opinions on it. but also just to hopefully show that this is not necessarily a cut and dry issue, that, is complex, it can be nuanced. And I think you all gave some beautiful answers that sort of can highlight the complexity of it. So however we define loneliness, it could be as general as a lack of social connection, or it can be as complex as, sort of a combination of subjective and objective factors that produce, a poor quality of, integrated interaction, whatever you want to say. But whatever it is, whatever we call it, however we define it, one thing is clear is that it is consuming us. It is definitely on the rise. And it's consistently rising. So reports of loneliness among young adults have increased every year since the late 70s. We have typically, we like to imagine maybe the loneliest populations being the older folks, those, over 65 or retired, empty nest, maybe don't have as many friends as they used to have. That's typically like the stereotype of the lonely person, but that's actually not necessarily the case anymore. It's actually younger folks, the preteens and that sort of thing, who are actually suffering the most from the rising epidemic of loneliness. And this is an epidemic. And I think I have a slide later on a little bit, but there's a Surgeon General report commissioned in 2023 just to look at the issue of loneliness because it's so prevalent. And this is global as well. The World Health Organization, as well as certain commissions and countries across the world, have been sort of tasked with looking into this discrete issue because it's becoming so big. So in addition to like rising global reports of loneliness, it is no coincidence that we are also seeing historic levels of distrust amongst ourselves. Compared to previous decades, previous times, we have the lowest levels of trust in government, low levels of trust in institutions, and low levels of trust in each other, more than we ever have in the past. And related to that as well, continuing the thread is we are more polarized than we've ever been. We're more ideologically divided than we have been in past decades. And so, it's no coincidence at all that all of this is connected to rising reports of loneliness. And so one thing we can say off the bat that, however we are choosing to define loneliness, it appears to be the case that, cohesion and trust have something to do with that feeling or that sense. And I don't know how well everyone can see this this graphic here, but it's just a visual representation of how bad it's getting. So social isolation has spiked in recent years. That's the first graphic there. And then household family social engagement. So the family gathering around the dinner table, family interacting with each other, just socializing with each other in general, has declined steadily over the years. A sense of companionship, especially in recent years, has sharply declined. And check out that fourth one, social engagement with friends, on the bottom left corner. That is the most precipitous decline, and especially among young people. There has been a decrease in about 20 hours per month. So young folks are interacting with friends dramatically less than previous generations have done. And then, non-household family social engagement has dropped. And then social engagement with others, people from other categories, has also declined. So holistically, across the board, people are becoming more and more isolated, and that social interaction and socializing it's vanishing. Does anybody, I know we probably don't want to talk that much. I get the sense that, we're not interested in doing too much talking, but is anybody brave enough to just say a couple of words about why you think this is? What's contributing to this? No pressure, but maybe if there's one or two people who want to throw out some opinions.
Well, I mean, what I'm gonna say is nothing novel. I mean, we're well as a culture well aware of the effects of because I have a 16-year-old daughter, and every day is a battle against the phone and the social
Mm,
media and the connection. And there are moments I do try to listen to try and better understand what it is that keeps her so obsessively connected to it. And it's the very same thing here. The social, she feels it's a social connection to friends, to whoever is in this, wider network. It's how she knows what people are doing. It's how she sees what's fashionable. It's how she sees what's you know, kind of keeps up with what's going on in the world, her world around her. And I also work in a high school, and there are moments in the day when the kids have downtime. And, I can remember 20 years ago, you had downtime, there would be chatter and noise in the classroom. Today, it's silence. Everyone pulls out their phone. The phones are never really away, to be honest, but
hmm
everyone refers immediately to the phone and heads are down, and there's no real conversation, no real chatter in the room because they're all engaged. And sometimes they might be texting someone who's in the room, actually in the room.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen that, yeah.
right, right.
So, I mean, this is well studied now, and we understand and we know so much more about the increasing ways in which young people just don't use their voices because, if they send a message to someone, they've had a chat. They literally feel they've talked to that person. Um,
Right, right.
well, yeah, just those are just my real world observations of especially young people, because I work with young
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, there is this sort of and there's also I don't know if you've noticed this, but there is this sort of like antagonism I have witnessed with young people and even, people in my group sometimes where it's like you've called someone. It's like an assault. Like you could have
Yeah.
texted me before, rather
Yeah.
than call. And God forbid, an unannounced or unsolicited
Yeah.
FaceTime or something, or I have to
Yeah.
be on like camera. Like,
Yeah.
that's
It's a, it's a,
how dare
a
you?
yeah, an intrusion.
You're right, right,
I have
right, right.
two daughters, and they will text
Mhm.
me. They'll send me a dozen text messages. I will just pick up. I will just dial. I will just call them. Like,
Right.
would it hurt just to call me? We could say this in 30 seconds as opposed to 21 text messages.
Exactly, exactly. But no,
Yeah.
talking is too intimate. Thank you so much, especially for sharing your lived experience with the younger generation that is suffering the most from this trend. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to share? What is causing this? Why is this going down? Or why is this connection going down so much? And so technology is something that has just been thrown out. Um, Anyone else have any ideas?
Hey, Lamar, there's actually two things in the chat.
Oh,
Um,
please share them
Jessica,
if you don't mind.
absolutely. Jessica commented, lockdown from COVID and the younger
Mm,
generation being on technology and not in person and not out in nature.
okay. So COVID-19 definitely is, it's its own discrete thing. And yeah, there's definitely like isolation and separation became more salient during the pandemic and when everyone is locked down. But here again, we hear technology. So something about technology, funny enough, technology that's designed to connect us seems to be driving us apart. And it's an interesting sort of paradox in that first comment where you have the report from the young person who's saying, well, like, well, actually, mom, I'm on social media all the time because it makes me feel more connected to my friends. But, we are seeing that technology and that, social media trend is actually hurting connection. Um, I think I had a slide about technology and the impact of technology on loneliness, but I believe I may have taken that out. But this may be something everyone already knows, but the reviews, I guess, are mixed on the role of technology and specifically social media when it comes to contributing to feelings of loneliness. Oddly enough, on one hand, it has become very therapeutic for helping and healing loneliness. The internet in general and social media in particular is very helpful with reducing isolation and feelings of loneliness, especially among marginalized groups. So let's say I am maybe trans or gender nonconforming in a rural town where I would normally be isolated or rejected. I can go online or I can join a Facebook group of other folks who affirm my gender identity, right? Or something along those lines, and feel more connected. Where we get into trouble with social media and where it increases negative feelings and feelings of loneliness or isolation is when we get into the comparison game. Because the problem seems to be just based on my own reading, you all please share if you feel something or have seen something different. But the problem seems to be the fact that what we see on social media actually is not the real person. And so what we're seeing are kind of the polished, unrealistic versions of people online. And that is not connection. That is just sort of like personas interacting with each other as opposed to real people. But contrast this trend with like how incredibly important connection is. We are ultra social creatures. Connection is a biological imperative. Stephen Porges, who's the founder of polyvagal theory, has gotten really famous recently, just sort of emphasizing how much social connection is important to us more than we know. I will not go into the polyvagal theory stuff right now, but suffice it to say that there's basically three vagal states that we are in, that our nervous system is in at all times, and that vagal state or that nervous system state is regulated entirely by, or almost entirely by, social connection. And so fight or flight, or rest and digest, or the dorsal vagal collapse, where we're sort of like catatonic and basically preparing or feeling as if we're about to die. All of that is regulated by the interactions we have with other people. This was an interesting, article from another scientist who studies social connection, just sort of on the evolution of social connection as like a basic need, kind of like food and water and shelter. So just reading this off really quickly, our need for social connection is so important that we have evolved a signaling mechanism that lets us know when we need more of it. Loneliness is a vital warning signal that tells us that our basic human need for social connection is not being met. Just like hunger and thirst are signals that we need food and water, loneliness signals that we need connection. And this signal is rooted deep within our brain. All this evidence clearly points to the idea that humans have evolved a basic need for social connection that is firmly grounded in our brains and bodies. So the next time you feel lonely, remember that this is your brain trying to tell you that you need social connection. And just like we don't ignore the signs of hunger and thirst, we shouldn't ignore the signs of loneliness. I like this just, because it makes salient the idea that it's not just sort of like a social or intellectual sort of thing. And, loneliness isn't this like idea. And that goes back to the other question, where is loneliness a feeling? On one hand, yes, it's a feeling, but, we tend to think of feelings as these like transient things, right? So, in fact, especially in our progressive, meditative, kind of woo-woo communities, we're very big on, detaching from feelings and recognizing that feelings come and go, and we should look at them as sort of clouds passing by. Well, loneliness, sure, it has a feeling component to it, but it's really more. It's kind of more biological. It's kind of more primal. It's not necessarily, something that we can just sort of let pass by or really detach from, because that would be sort of the equivalent of saying, like, our hunger or our thirst is a transient feeling that we can, detach from. Yes, and also no. It's a bit more important than that, and that can sort of factor into, maybe what's potentially contributing to the loneliness epidemic on some level. This idea that, maybe we don't realize how important this topic is. So, yeah, it's a life or death issue. Social isolation is arguably the strongest and most reliable predictor of suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and lethal suicidal behavior among samples varying in age, nationality, and clinical severity. So that means this is transcendent. This is a core human issue. Social isolation contributes to early death, no matter who you are or where you come from. Over 4 decades of research has produced robust evidence that lacking social connection, and in particular scoring high on measures of social isolation, is associated with a significantly increased risk for early death from all causes. And so social isolation, is not just it's not just something that can lead to self-harm. It can be a contributing or even a causal factor to physical medical conditions, cardiovascular disease, stroke, I think even diabetes and things like that. It's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. I thought that was pretty intense. Lacking social connection is actually worse than smoking. Isn't that about a pack of cigarettes? 15, isn't it? Yeah, that sounds like an entire pack of cigarettes per day. Um, or drinking 6 alcoholic beverages daily, 6 alcoholic drinks daily. That's, that sounds like alcoholism to me. So you can have a chain smoker smoking a pack of cigarettes every day, or someone who's binge drinking daily. That person is in less danger than the person who lacks social connection. I just feel like does that feel that felt pretty alarming or surprising to me. I don't know if that sort of surprises anyone else, but hopefully it just hammers home how important this topic is, or this issue is. Okay. Oh, and you know what? I don't have a watch with me. How are we doing on time, Morgan? I know we
It's
have more time.
7:30.
Oh, okay, okay. I know we have more time than I initially thought. But just so everyone knows, I'm sorry I didn't announce this earlier. I actually budgeted about an hour for this presentation, but I know there was, it was communicated this was 7 to 9, so I may, just sort of go into more detail or go a bit longer with the meditation that we'll do at the end of this, if that's okay. All right, so what contributes to it? What are some factors that contribute to loneliness? And we can look at this on 3 levels. There are sort of individual things, more like social things, and then structural institutional things. And so health issues, especially people with physical disabilities, tend to suffer more from feelings of loneliness. Class, socioeconomic class comes into play a lot. People, particularly who make under 50,000, which to me seems like a pretty large number. That's I believe that hovers around a fairly standard annual national salary, if I'm not mistaken. But making less than that increases your risk of loneliness. And then being from marginalized groups, so racial minorities that have been traditionally ostracized, LGBTQ communities, and then folks from like rural environments tend to suffer more from feelings of loneliness. And if anybody else knows, just so we kind of have it on the recording, any other individual factors that you have witnessed contributing to loneliness, feel free to drop those in the chat or speak them out loud. You can come off mute at any time. But these seem to be the big three according to the Surgeon General. All right, so okay, so there are individual things that contribute to heightened feelings of loneliness and put people at increased risk, but then social things come into play as well. And so, what kind of environment are you in? This is like your local community or your family environment or things like that. What is the nature and quality of that social environment? Are you, is it a sharing community? I grew up in a place, I grew up in the South, and I feel fortunate to have grown up around folks who were family or felt like family. And yeah, you go to someone's house and actually, borrow. It sounds, kind of cliche at this point, but yeah, you could borrow a cup of sugar or whatever you needed, or like, the neighbors are barbecuing, come over, that sort of thing. I grew up with that, but not everyone does. And then social cohesion, acting in solidarity. And so that's, one area, just speaking from my personal experience, where I did not have, you know, um, always have the benefit of that. So, there are some tight-knit communities where people are, we're all a team, we're all on the same page. But I've lived in communities where there is no solidarity. In fact, people are sort of competitive with each other, and there's mistrust, which leads into this third communal factor. Trust is very, very important when it comes to alleviating loneliness. Believing that others generally have good intentions for you, believing that people are pure when in their interactions with you, um, tends to be a protective factor when it comes to not feeling so lonely. And then this is a big one that I feel like is not talked about enough: structural and institutional factors that produce outcomes of loneliness. So, what are the policies that are in play? Um, Housing, education, policing, that sort of thing. I not long ago watched a lecture on something called white rage, and it talked about just sort of the policies that were implemented to, in a lot of ways, cause voter suppression. And one of the ways that that was done was through policies that would isolate certain communities. And so we reduce public transportation in those communities. We enact policies that lead to them sort of being restricted to their communities, to their areas, and you don't see a lot of interacting. Um, and so, whether intentionally, whether they're insidious like that, or even unintentionally, sometimes we have the best intentions when we're enacting sort of rules and policies, but they have the effect of being isolating to certain groups. But your policies are important, networks. And so, being in a community, let's say where, on Sundays, there's a local basketball tournament, right? So people in the community can join the team and everybody watches the game with, community members competing in some sort of sports. What can kids do after school, right? Do kids have a place to go? Are the phones the only thing they have? Are there, um, extracurricular clubs? Are they in the debate team? Are they on the soccer team? Are they, joining some sort of after school program? And then are there actual structures, physical spaces that can facilitate social interaction? What's going on with the public library? Is it a space that people actually go to, or is it sort of just collecting dust? What's going on with the local parks? I just interviewed a person from the Bronx who was, talking about how important the local park was for him and his family and his community, and how that's like just a communal space that people would have to go and socialize with each other. Churches, religious institutions, that sort of thing, are those present? All of this, sort of shows how at a high level, um, governments and communities can sort of um, through their institutional choices impact feelings of loneliness.
I just want to add something about the policies, institutional policies, specifically in relation to education. So
Sure.
I live in Northern Virginia, and we became aware last week that ICE, the immigration, the branch of Homeland Security, they
Hmm.
they now have the authority to enter our schools and, effectively conduct raids and remove kids from the school, from the classroom. And just
Right.
the intense sadness, because I work a lot with English language learners. And as I walked through the school today, I looked at so many of the kids and I thought, when will our numbers start to decline? Because surely if I were one of these young people, I would be so afraid. I would be feeling lonely. I would be feeling mistrustful, so many of the things you've just mentioned. And you know, these are
Exactly.
these are policies that we are living through, and we will very soon be seeing the consequences.
Yeah.
Um,
Very soon, as in already seeing the consequences. On that note, there was this, oh man, it hurt my heart so bad. There was this
yeah.
letter that was going viral not long ago on social media, ironically, of this kid who was just writing a letter to an immigrant friend, who was so afraid of losing his friend, um, if he were ever taken in one of these raids. And I just, oh my God, if I wish I had it, I could put it on the screen, but it was heartbreaking. And it just, yeah, it goes to show, yeah, the divisiveness, right? And that goes back to the,
Yeah. It's
the
like
polarization.
throwing a stone
Yeah,
in the water, and it just the ripples, the effects just are ongoing and so far reaching. It's
precisely,
even
precisely.
as a teacher, the sense of loss and the sense of sadness and loneliness is, you feel it if you everyone who is somehow connected and you feel it. It's visceral.
Very much. Um, Yeah, and so this, this institutional level, this it can be very insidious, and it's something. Thank you so much for talking about it, because I feel like, that's something that's missing from the conversation a lot, especially as we are more polarized, and you're seeing policies that are kind of designed in many ways to increase that, divisiveness. Yeah, yeah, and it has such a ripple effect that we're not necessarily aware of until we see it. And it emphasizes how much of, we're all connected, we're all interconnected. So absolutely, we think we're targeting this, one small isolated group of people, but when you do that, you are disturbing the entire web, of connection that's, around those folks. How are you, just out of curiosity, what do you do as an educator to sort of soften the blow of that? Is there anything you try to do with your students to help mitigate, maybe some of the fear, um, or the
Um,
chilling effect?
it's just a feeling. It's just a way of how, for me personally, how I interact with them, just
Hmm.
always lifting them up, stressing their strengths, the fact that, because I work with English language learners, you are multilingual, these are your superpowers, these aren't deficits, these are things that, I wish I could speak more than one language, and just trying to always give them a sense of worth from how I treat them, how I interact with them. Um, we're learning more about what our rights are within the building and what their rights are, but it's also it's so new that we're learning every day. We're receiving information on what we can do, etc.
Right, right. And that's another complicating factor with all of this stuff. It's happening so quickly, and it's, so overwhelming, that it's hard to react to it or respond to it appropriately, maybe. Thank you for that share. Anyone else? Is there anything that's maybe left off this list? What factors are interacting with or contributing to this loneliness epidemic?
Jessica made a comment in the chat, Lamar.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica says, I agree. And I have felt this pain, even though my family is not necessarily at risk, but I feel the universal pain. I feel the universal pain that is out there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so that goes back into like how, why that ripple can span out. It doesn't have to be someone who's directly, physically present in the community. It could be any person with empathy could feel, like, or this is a lonelier world if this sort of stuff is going on, right, Um, and maybe we're emotionally influenced by some of this stuff, because we're primed with that kind of divisiveness now. And like, right, when I go outside, and I'm interacting with folks, even though I'm far removed physically from that sort of thing, it imprints me with, this sort of sense of divisiveness. And that doesn't help with connection. So I do like the idea of being, more conscious and intentional about connection, precisely because you have this stuff going on. Any other thoughts or ideas before I move on? Um, Anything institutional, community-based, or individual that seems to be a risk factor for interacting with loneliness? No worries. If you think of anything, feel free to drop it in the chat or just unmute and happy to go back. So, all right. So we looked at this rise in loneliness. We looked at how ironic it is because it's very damaging. It's not something that we need to have going on. It hurts us on a biological level. Um, and so that's a huge sort of paradoxical conflict there. We're doing something that's sort of antagonistic to our very biology. And then we looked at some of the risk factors and the intersectionality of it. There are definitely at an individual level, a social level, and a institutional structural level things that can increase or decrease it. But if here, I want to go into something a little bit deeper. This is something that's sort of more fundamental. So this is like a universal issue that everyone has to deal with, and that it's actually, at a very core level, something that, aside from anything else, contributes to loneliness, has always contributed to loneliness because it's sort of an inherent tension, kind of hardwired into the way we are made. And I'm calling it the connection dilemma, but there are some psychotherapists who refer to it in different ways. This little graphic kind of hopefully sums up, in short language, what the dilemma is. So there's a therapist, an author that, and an educator that I encourage everyone to look into, Lawrence Heller. He's big expert on the connection dilemma, and he's had a book that he wanted to call Connection. He calls it what is it? Our greatest desire and our biggest fear. Our greatest desire and our biggest fear, and he's proven that just over the years. And because connection can be very very healing for us, but it can also be very harmful for us. And he sort of developed this concept of something called a connection adapter survival style, which is sort of like this is a developmental issue. It comes at birth. It's even actually prenatal sometimes. And so the connection dilemma occurs when, actually, let me back up. Let me back up before I confuse anyone. Has anyone noticed how open children are? Um, the younger they are, the more open they seem to be. Just a personal story. I remember being in an airport and there's this little toddler who was sort of walking by and he was like aggressively saying hi to everyone, like going down the row. And God forbid you did not say hi back. It was a problem. Like, so this kid was like, "Do you not see me waving at you?" Right? Like, hi. And he did it through, and I was impressed by how diverse the row of people were. I was there. I'm a sort of a tall African American guy. Next to me was like a Japanese guy in a business suit, and next to him is like a middle-aged white woman, and like this kid is just like down the row waving, and we're all smiling and waving back. There is no division, there is no tension or anything like that, and that connection was so easy for the child. Children have no problem playing with each other. Generally speaking, if maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but my sense seems to be that, something about youth and, the younger, the better, seems to be correlated with openness, right? And so I guess we can look at that as sort of, that's the healing side of connection. That's the ingrained sort of natural biological side of connection when we are open and we're receptive and you know we welcome we welcome social interaction. But life is life, and life can teach us sometimes that connections are dangerous, and that is when over time the openness that children sort of are come into the world with can be worn down by harmful or negative or disaffirming interactions with other people that sort of teach them to be less and less and less and less receptive to social connection. And that wearing down can even start in the womb. And so, am I in the womb of a mother who's like super excited to have a baby, or, welcoming a baby into the world, parents decorating a room, putting a crib up, all of that sort of thing? Or maybe, am I a baby that's in the womb of a mother who's very nervous about being pregnant and isn't really ready for a child and has a lot of reservation, doesn't really know what she's going to do? Or even, a mother who's in an environment where maybe there's a lot of hostility, maybe she's being shamed for being pregnant, that sort of thing. So just even at that level, at a prenatal stage, already the infant is being shaped and influenced around the issue of openness to connection or guardedness from connection. Is connection a healing and good thing, or is connection a source of danger and pain? So that's the crux of what the connection survival style is, and it comes out of that fundamental connection dilemma. And so this survival style comes from people who are traumatized negatively um, with that question of connection, social connection. Some of us at a young age learn early, unfortunately, and we're sort of locked into that template of people and connections and relationships being dangerous and off-putting as opposed to being good things that help us. Um, and so what happens when we are primed with that, that early sort of negative side of interaction or that negative side of connection? Well, unfortunately, it causes a bit of a psychological splitting inside of us. And so we get something called shame-based identifications that can be very common with this style, especially when the negative interactions happen at a young age. And so people who suffer with the connection survival style often deal with feelings of being inadequate. And there's an anxiety that comes with that general feeling of inadequacy. I'm scared, I'm helpless, I'm not enough. And so I'm not as good as everybody else. Or I feel like I'm worse than the people around me. There can be an existential shame, and so that goes into the suicidal ideation that we see on the rise with isolated communities. This is different from being suicidal, which is I'm suicidal is there's the intent and maybe even the plan to actually end my life. But suicidal ideation is just this idea that like, I wish I wasn't even born. I wish I didn't exist. I wish I wasn't alive. The world would be better off if I had never been born. That sort of thing. And you see that commonly with this. And then feeling like the black sheep. And so people who have encountered the connection dilemma at an early age, at a developmental age, they feel like they're on the outside looking in. And you'll notice that it becomes a pattern. It's not just a one-off thing. It can start in the family. So feeling like, you're the outsider in the family and you're kind of, on the outside of the circle looking in. But just be aware and mindful that that pattern continues even outside of the family. So in most social groups, it seems like everyone's bonded and connected and getting along, and you're sort of like, you know, on the outside. You're the outsider. You're the outcast. So if that becomes like a repetitive pattern, you're seeing that in multiple places across time and space. That's an indication that all right, we might be dealing with a developmental issue here around that issue of connection. The burden thing is another big common theme. So man, how many of us feel like, oh, I don't want to bother anyone. I don't reach out because I don't want to bother anyone. I don't talk to other folks because I don't want to put stress on them. I don't ask for help because I feel like a burden. That can actually stem from being at a young age. Unfortunately, especially I'm with a highly stressed parental figure or figures. Who impose the feeling on some adults impose the feeling on their children that they are burdens, that they're stressing them out, and so that's something that if it gets imprinted too heavily too early carries on into adulthood. What do we do when we have a shame-based I'm sorry to be taking so long on this slide, but yeah, what do we do when we have this sort of shame-based thing imprinted on us? Shame is a hard thing to carry. And so that's where the splitting comes in. Sometimes if the shame becomes so intense, we try to, one, suppress it or dissociate from it or project it out. But then the other thing we do is we try to counterbalance it with being prideful. And so when our ego gets deflated in these sorts of ways, we can sort of sometimes react by inflating in other ways. And how does, what do we look for and on the ego inflation side that might indicate to us that we're dealing with a person who just has a chronic problem with social connection? Well, the inflated side will typically be, I'm actually going to skip the first bullet, that disdain for feelings and emotions. That's typically, the common thing we see in terms of ego inflation for folks who just have a general problem with connection. Anybody here familiar with the Big Bang Theory, the sitcom? Did anybody watch that show? I can't see if any hands are raised or heads are nodding.
No.
Unfortunately, no one? Are you kidding? No one is familiar with the Big Bang Theory or the Big Bang Theory. I think
Oh,
that's the.
Shelley would like to speak.
Okay, come on. Rescue me, Shelley. I'm like, what? I need someone to describe Sheldon.
Sheldon, Sheldon's like my old boss. He's like so unique and so oh, now I just like not sure how to explain him because he's like so intelligent and
Mm-hmm.
so naive at the same time.
Right. But what about feelings and emotions? Is he a touchy-feely person?
No.
And how does he feel about other human beings who are touchy-feely?
He thinks it's gross, I think.
Yeah. And that's kind of the common like ego inflation sort of, side of this sort of thing. Or like you'll see those people who are like I see this actually with a lot of guys who are not in touch with their own feelings. They complain about women being like, oh, she's too emotional, blah 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 blah, or calling their feelings, and those people, you know, they're inferior because they're so emotional and they're not rational because they're just all in their feelings. Um, but then so I compensate by the fact that I'm actually overwhelmed by my feelings by looking at feelings as a negative thing. And this phrase, I'm so grossed out by this phrase. It was so common. I hear this a lot about like catching feelings for someone. 'Cause I don't know if anybody else has heard that. That's maybe just sort of like in the kind of circles I've been in. But when it comes to dating and relationships, I hear men in particular sometimes criticize other people for quote unquote catching feeling. Like feelings are a disease. Like literally, like it's a like it's some virus or something that you have for someone. Um, and yeah, speaking, it's interesting that I think it was Shelley, you mentioned your boss was like that, because that's another common sort of trait of this person who has problems with social connection. They tend to emphasize roles and titles. And so this can be the person who's heavy into like the fact that they are the boss. But it can also be the parent, the mom whose entire life has sort of been, it's how do I want to choose my words carefully because I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but there is a such thing as like vesting one's sole identity into that role. I'm a mom and that's all I am. And I think, in some ways, maybe that's something people are socialized to do, but it can also be an escape for this person who otherwise just has a social connection issue. And you can see that in like when the children are away or the children grow up and leave the house, there's a collapse that kind of shows that, all right, well, who else are you outside of that role? And when you can't answer that question, that's when we have a bit of a problem. And so I want to spend a little bit more time on these other two, being smarter or more spiritual than other people. Did I get the slides in here? No. Um, is there a way to go back a slide? I can't do it on my phone. Morgan, are you a co-host? Are you able to like click back to the previous slide?
No, I can't because I don't have access to your device, and you can't. I would have had to be sharing.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, duh. All right. Well, ignore what's on the screen now because I want to talk about those two, smarter and more spiritual. Because what I'm getting into now is like, well, what are what are the developmental issues, what are the core issues that might, aside from everything else we've talked about, individual quirks and social issues and policy and all of that, what are some core developmental character and personality issues that might make someone predisposed to a problem with social connection and make them more vulnerable to loneliness and isolation. And so that's what we were sort of just talking about. There are two buckets though that get get really there are two buckets of really common traits for the type of person who is disconnected and sort of leans towards social withdrawal rather than social connection. And so one is the person who focuses on smarts, being smart, or how much smarter they are than other people. That intellectual person, that intellectualizing person, um, can suffer from disconnection more than others. This is the person who, focuses on theories, ideas, intellectual things more than emotional things. Person who will get lost in a book. All of this stuff is good. Yeah, it's good to be, intellectually curious, intellectually stimulated, intellectually invested. But the problem comes when it is used as a covert method of avoiding emotionality and relationality. Um, so, you'll see them typically gravitate towards careers that involve limited social interaction. And so, careers that involve, locked in your office behind a computer, working on spreadsheets or something. I've had, I've had someone I know who was looking for a job, and she's, sort of on the older side, a woman who's specifically said one of her criteria for her job search is that she does not have to interact with other human beings. Like, she's specifically looking for that. Maybe, there's the trope you might know of, like the man who spends time in his garage, locked in his garage, working on, I don't know, building a bench or whatever, something like that. But the idea is that we focus on, intellectual pursuits that withdraw us from having to engage with our feelings and withdraw us from having specifically to relate and interact with other people. And yeah, that person tends to be like the Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, who's this sort of Sheldon on that show is this physicist who's super smart, but like just does not understand social interaction with other people and gets lost in the academics. Um, so that's the intellectual person, the intellectualizing sort of group. Be mindful that we all do this to some degree. This is a universal developmental element. And so it is present within me. It is present within every one of you. And so, it just depends on, to what extent you identify with this dilemma, but it's there for you. And so we all, in some ways, maybe, we daydream, maybe we overthink, maybe we get lost in our head, maybe we prefer just to, be behind the screen. That goes back to earlier. We were talking about the kid who prefers to just like text and, scroll social media rather than actually come face to face with another person. Um, that's where we stay in our heads because it feels safer and more comfortable there. I like being in my head. I'm familiar with everything that goes on there. When you as another human try to come socialize with me, now you're making me leave the comfort zone of my head and be in my body, and I don't like that necessarily. And then that could be because doing that has been dangerous. Especially for folks who've had early experiences of trauma, being in their body is not a safe feeling for them. And so, yeah, it does take some sensitivity and time to get them out of their head and into their bodies. Okay, so that's any questions about this? Because I know I'm just dumping a ton of information on y'all, but please stop me if you have questions or comments. So that's just something to look for that would indicate that, the disconnection, the social isolation thing, well, this is actually this is like a developmental thing in this person. When you see like, their predisposition towards more of the academic or intellectual side of things or being in their head, and the preference for that as opposed to being in their bodies. So the second one is something we may all be more familiar with if you're into Kripalu and Minka, and that's the spiritualizing person. So on one hand, you have the intellectualizing person who I feel like, their root chakra energy jumps up to their third eye as opposed to, being present in the root. The spiritualizing person has their root energy like shoot up to the crown. And so they're just, they live their lives in the energetic field and have not fully embodied. And so they spiritualize everything, right? And so these people tend to be more comfortable with God or divinity. They're more comfortable with nature and they're more comfortable with animals than they are with people. And because they're not fully embodied, they can actually be pretty psychic. They have access to energetic realms and energetic fields of consciousness that less traumatized people do not. Yeah, they tend to be your spiritual seekers. So they are very interested in pursuing, spiritual paths, self-help paths that are, have a spiritual bent to them. They're going to be the folks that are, they love to do your tarot and your reiki and your astrology and all of that sort of stuff. And which is fine, but there are a couple of things that indicate that this is more of a spiritual bypassing, which is something that we want to avoid. So spiritual bypassing is sort of just what it sounds like. It's great to feel that transcendent or transpersonal connection with divinity. It's great to pursue those spiritual paths, but it's not great to use those as tools of avoidance. The reason we do these practices, the reason we do this sort of spiritual stuff is to help us be more present with the complexities and the pains and the nuances of life rather than escaping them. All right. And so I think that's the critical difference. You'll see the person who has this disconnection problem at a developmental level engaging in spiritual escapism. What are some signs? They tend to be overwhelmed. So they can get in sensory overload. And so electromagnetic frequencies, being around a lot of loud noise, being around pollution, having too much just sort of energetic sensory overload can be overwhelming for them. I had a teacher for a healing modality. Some of you may be familiar with. It's called IET, Integrated Energy Therapy. And this woman, spiritually, like powerful, powerful person. You know, the way she can work with and move energy is just amazing. Like, you know, beyond what I had seen in the past. But she could also get easily overwhelmed. And so she was telling this story about a time where she was just going through airport security and kind of had a breakdown at TSA, especially having to go through those scanners and the radiation from those things. She was just so hypersensitive to that stuff that like she had to call a friend to help her. And so there are some, you know, spiritual folks like that, where it's tough for them to be around folks. It's tough for them to feel deeply connected because they'll get enmeshed with other people's energies. Um, and that's something we hear, you know, people who are empathic say a lot. You know, empath protection is sort of like a big topic, just because what you really have are empaths who, you know, need more boundaries, need more grounding, and so that they can filter the sensory inputs they have. Otherwise, you know, you see them struggling a bit um, on this issue. All right, so that's just something to look out for. Right? So how do I know this may be a developmental issue? Um, I see people who have a tendency to intellectualize or a tendency to spiritualize rather than ground themselves in the here and now. Live example of how bad that can get is, you know, I just was working with someone previously some years ago who was talking about a really horrible experience of physical abuse, but just was sort of so, you know, you would think he was just sort of talking about the weather, the way he was, you know, sort of just so academic and intellectual about something that was so horrible. And so, you know, I tried to stop him and just be like, I just want to, you know, say, did you hear what you just said? You know, do you hear what you're saying and how horrible that sounds? You know, how are you feeling as you talk about that? Um, and that gets into now I can get into this slide that's on the screen, which is about, you know, where do we go, you know, if we do suffer or deal with this developmental issue? And by the way, again, we all do. How do we get around it? Before I get into that, though, are there any questions, comments about anything that I just sort of rattled off previously? I know I've been talking a lot. Or is everybody good? Everybody following that? Anything I need to repeat? Anything that didn't make sense?
No, I think
Or
it makes a lot of sense. It's just it's a lot, and I'm trying to process, but it's all making good sense. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I like when you share like those personal examples, because then it makes it so much more in my mind. I can visualize and understand more. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. I try to share some examples to kind of bring it home, just so
Yeah.
you kind of see it in action. But ultimately, those are the big buckets, right? The people who are not in their body and do not connect, who avoid relationships, tend to be in their head or in spirituality. Um, oh, and one more thing. Sorry. Because they're not in their body, another very important thing is that you will see physical symptoms. So another thing to look out for, right? If I have somebody who's sort of like intrinsically, you know, problematic with social connection or has problems with social connection, you will see a host of physical symptoms in them. They can, uh, you know, they can look very burned out. They can feel or sound very burned out, um, just because there's so much nervous charge that's ungrounded in their bodies that it overwhelms. And so anxiety and panic attacks are very, very, very common with the connection survival style. Panic and fear, or just generalized anxiety, is probably the number one symptom that we have a person who's not really comfortable connecting with others or connecting to their body. Other physical symptoms manifest very commonly things like fibromyalgia, irritable bowel symptom or syndrome, so bowel issues, muscle cramps just from sort of carrying tension in the body. You'll see those sorts of like chronic syndromal things happening a lot with folks who have this sort of issue. Now, when it comes to getting past it, the theme is reconnection. And so this whole thing is about, the healing power of social connection. That connection starts with the body. So, we start with focusing on somatic feeling. Um, we're talking about something that's a highly, or should be a highly emotionally charged issue. How do you feel right now as you're talking about that? You're remembering something that's, highly emotionally charged from your past. What's going on, you know, in your body? How are you feeling as you relive that experience? And so just that check-in with how is this feeling right now, to recall this, to relive this, or to have this conversation, to do this activity. How are you feeling right now? That can help really catch and interrupt the tendency to intellectualize or spiritualize. So if you know someone who seems to fall into that category, or if you yourself seem to fall into that category, one actionable tool you can do is just to keep checking in. How am I feeling right now? Wait a minute, how does it feel for me to talk about this? How does it feel for me to engage in this activity? How does it feel for me to, be in this room, or whatever, the issue may be? And then breathing. Shallow breathing and holding the breath is another major, major symptom of the person who has problems with social connection. And so checking in with your breathing. Are you holding your breath? Like, so I'm one of these people, right? And so I even now have to catch myself like, wait a minute, am I breathing as I'm going through this presentation? Yeah. I have to take a moment, reconnect to my body, take a deep breath in, and just, remind myself to breathe. And so please do that with yourselves. And if you see that this is something, among your friends or family that could be useful, it could be helpful sometimes to interrupt them and just remind them to take a deep breath, especially if they're triggered, if they're angry, or if they're, supercharged, coming back to the breath. And then, so social connection with others, so that we're not one, actionable tool that helps us break out of loneliness and isolation is to focus on what works. Focus on what works. Part of what keeps us lonely, part of what keeps us disconnected and isolated is a tendency towards the negative. Maybe we've learned, going back to like, it can even be at a prenatal stage. We've learned that, people can be dangerous. And so, we have our, antenna out looking for danger. And so that can prime us into this idea that, all right, each new interaction, each new social connection, well, that's a potential for being hurt rather than being helped. And so to get past that, it becomes really important to become intentional about the relationships that are positive. Who are the relationships that have helped you get through trauma? Who are the relationships, or, what are those relationships that help you sustain yourself? Trust me, if you are here right now and you are breathing, it is because you have relationships that sustain you. You would not be here without it. And so it takes some conscious, like, well, who are those people that are, am I overlooking the relationships currently, presently, that are, really feeding me and helping me remain my best self? While also acknowledging that, right, maybe you're someone who needs to balance connection with some periods of aloneness to recharge, and just honoring that and not pushing yourself to connect. When it's, your body is resisting that, because what you can then do is just reinforce the idea that connection is a bad thing or a dangerous thing. So boundary, respect for boundaries is very important, and often is what, causes some of this stuff. And then, reconnecting to, something more transcendent, just generally taking focus out of dysfunction and putting focus into function. What is functional, what is working, and even within yourself. You have resources within you that got you here today, that are keeping you, sustained and thriving right now. Let's put attention, let's put focus, let's put energy into those things that are working for you, and not being so clouded by the things that, distract or hurt. Okay, so reconnection to the body, reconnection to people through focusing on positive relationships, and reconnecting to spirit and the transcendent by focusing on inner resources, that have been imprinted in you that are functional and helpful. Woo, deep breath, everybody. I think that's that's all of the informational portion of tonight's show. um, any questions, any comments about any of that, voluminous pile of data that I threw at you?
Margie,
And go ahead.
the stain, I call it, a lot of things you mentioned triggered in me. I call it the stain. The method I use seems to not completely eradicate, like you mentioned, childhood traumas or mental, physical. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, it sounds like something has been touched, maybe pretty deeply. You called it the stain. Did I hear you right? You said something is a stain, S-T-A-I-N?
Is meaning someone hurt me deeply that I cared, and there's nothing that will change that. There is no
Okay.
going back. There is no, you can't take back the words you said. You can't take back the rock you threw, that type of analogy, philosophy, what have you.
Yeah, yeah. And so the question becomes, what do you do? What do you do? Yeah, yeah. Ooh, first off, one, thank you so much for that question, for that share, for that vulnerability, and it's relatable. Unfortunately, that type of, that stain, that to use that phrase, that's like, yeah, there's no going back. Happens a lot, way more than it should, and that's kind of the core, maybe, of even what the word trauma means. It's something that there's no going back from. Normally, things happen day to day that we can digest them, we can process them, we can integrate them. But some things are just, I can't digest this. I can never process this. And what can happen then is that begins to, going forward from that moment, distort how you see yourself, distort how you see other people, and distort even how you see life or the world. And it sounds like, some of that may be going on with, what you went through. There's no one, I'm not the expert, and so I don't want to present myself as the expert who has the answer. One thing I can offer to you comes from a poem called Out to Play. And the opening stanza of that poem is a very great line. It says, no hurt survives for long without our help. And then the rest of the poem is, then she kissed me and sent me out to play. That, that is so meaningful to me, because I think that is where we can interject a little bit. You can never change the pain, especially if it was, something that was, deeply, deeply or profoundly, like, wrong or unjust or unfair. There's nothing you can do because you can't change the past. What you need to look out for, though, right, is, are there any ways maybe we are perpetuating the pain, right? And so that's the best that I can offer as what to do in that situation. Yes, this happened to me. Yes, it was unfair. Yes, it was horrible. But I'm not going to help this thing survive. And so what I want to do is to make conscious the ways I've been helping this pain live on, because I don't have to do that. That's where I have agency and choice. I don't have to perpetuate what happened to me. And so, a lot of times we might be perpetuating it without realizing it. It's not an intentional thing. But start by looking for that. Does that make sense? Does that help in any way?
And you said the author of No Hurt was who?
I think it's the poet was called Brian Andreas, if not I'm not mistaken, Andreas. I could be wrong, but it's just a very short little poem. No hurt survives for long without our help. And then she kissed me and sent me out to play. Um, that it's called Out to Play is the name of the poem. And maybe that's the other thing too, is you know, incorporating play and pleasure, especially if that was kind of robbed from you, um, and even more so if it was robbed from you at an early age. You know, let's prioritize it
Right.
more now.
That's perfect. That no hurt survives so long without our help.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly, exactly. If nothing else, you know, if I can't do anything else, I can make the decision that I'm not going to help this thing
Right.
damage me.
Keep giving
Thank,
it,
keep giving it what?
keep giving it life.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. You know, acknowledging that it's real and that it's there and that it happened, but you know, separating it, you know, out the ways that we are keeping it alive and helping it hurt us. Thank you so much for that. Any other comments? Any other questions? Anything I need to repeat? Again, I'm so sorry. I have this. I love this sort of stuff, and I could talk about it all day. And so I tend to information dump on people, and so it's like you get like 3 days worth of information in one session.
Lamar,
Hmm.
Jessica would like to share actually.
Jessica, you want gorgeous. Anybody else want to chime in? Anything stood out or anything you want to share generally before we move into our meditation? All right. I'm not going to try to play this music, but before we do this, is it all right if we take like a quick 5 minute break? I have to run to the restroom and also want to give you a chance to sort of stretch, breathe, especially after this information dump. Um, can we, Morgan, is that okay? Can we pause for just like 5 minutes?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. So we'll come back at 8:40, everyone, and begin the meditation for the last 20 minutes of class.
All
Perfect.
right. All right. So for this, I just need everybody to get in a comfortable space. You can be sitting or lying down. Doesn't really matter as long as you are just feeling cozy. And we just want you in a space where you're not going to be disturbed for the next, 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Let's start by focusing on the breath, bringing all attention and all awareness to your breathing. Deep breath in, holding for 3 seconds. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, exhale, hold. One more time. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Just continue breathing deeply, inhaling deeply, exhaling slowly. And again, remembering that just by thinking about breathing, just by focusing your awareness on your breathing, your body will automatically begin to relax. Go ahead and release any tightness or tension you may be carrying in your legs. So relaxing from the toes to the ankles, to the calves, letting them become softer up the thighs and hips. Relaxing your shoulders, arms, wrists, and fingers. And definitely focusing on the neck and jaw, unclenching your jaw if it's tight. You can even relax your tongue. And just let your body become heavier and heavier. Give all of your body weight to whatever surface you're lying down on or sitting down on right now. And we want to call forward a part of you, part of your personality that might be really deeply longing for connection. You may not be fully aware of this part of you, but let's imagine that somewhere within you, maybe hidden from awareness, maybe you're aware of it, maybe not, but a shadow part of you that feels starved for connection. I really want closeness. I want love. I want intimacy, and I'm not getting it. Invite that part of you forward. And let's have that part of you become saturated in love, just sending it love, love, love. And as much as it can, ask that part of you, if it's willing, just relax, relax as much as it can. And as this part of you continues to increasingly relax, feel the power and energy of love transforming any desperation for connection, any desperation. Feel that transform into magnetism. So you are becoming more magnetic and attractive as you relax. And this attractiveness may be physical, so honoring the beauty in your body. This attractiveness is probably emotional as well. Honoring the parts of your personality that are attractive and magnetic. Feel this magnetism even rising to the level of your mind and spirit. Energizing those attractive ideas you have, attractive thoughts. attractive spiritual inclinations. So let's just let that part of you that feels desperate for connection continue to relax and become more attractive and magnetic as it relaxes. And while that continues, we'll call forward a second part of you. And this part is very afraid of connection. This part of you puts up some immense boundaries, probably has been sabotaging connection, sabotaging relationships, keeping you alone. Call that part of you forward. And let's also saturate that part of you in love as well. Thanking this part of you for just wanting to keep you safe. And let's ask this part as well to relax into this love. And as it relaxes, it can release some old and stuck memories from the past. Old and stuck memories of betrayal, old and stuck memories of failures, maybe. Old stuck memories of the ways interacting with people has been harmful. Letting those go. And letting love draw back in the light you gain from those experiences. Maybe they made you a wiser person. Maybe they made you more resilient. And also making space for memories of your achievements. What you gained. So for the next few minutes, as these two parts of you continue to relax and transform, let's allow yourself to see opportunity rather than danger. So releasing the sense of danger. There's nothing to be afraid of. There is no danger. And inviting the opportunities that are in front of you. Let's just take a few moments for that to happen.